So let's start with this quote in your book. Power is always personal. Proximity is influence. The more personal and absolute the power, the closer to the body, the better. So you talk a lot about power families in this narrative. How are they different from our ordinary nuclear families that we know?
That's such a good question. I mean, this book is a history of, it's a family history. So it covers the biological family and what we call the nuclear family as well. But it also covers power families. Power families are like nuclear families, but different. Power and great wealth corrode, poison, corrupt, and complicate all the relationships of love that you usually think of as normal in a family. Now, we all know from our own families that even families without power and without great wealth are pretty complicated. There are rivalries, there are jealousies, there are infidelities, all of these things. And so imagine how complicated it is within a family where the stakes are so much higher and where the values of family, even other members of the family, have to be sacrificed, sometimes literally sacrificed, to the greater cause of the state and the dynasty. And, but what you started off saying about power, the closer you are to power, power is personal. This is true even in democracies. But obviously, in autocracies, in dictatorships, this is even more true. And it doesn't matter how the access is gained. I mean, for example, with Emperor Paul I of Russia, his valet, who was in charge of his underwear, ultimately became one of the top ministers in the government account and one of the richest men in Russia. So Boris Yeltsin's tennis coach became one of the most powerful people in Russia, and so on. So this is true in all systems. But that power can change. Power is kind of liquid. It flows. It's always in flux. It's always evolving. It flows towards the greater power. So if the power was withdrawn, the power drains and flows elsewhere. And that's partly what this book is about. I regard myself partly as a historian of power. And autocracies in many ways all act the same way. And so, when you look at power families or dictatorships today, they could well be you could well be reading about the Herods or Alexander the Great, or some of the rulers of Africa. So I guess that's one of the themes of the book, the closeness to power. It's a good quote.
Good, yeah, proximity to power. So how did you narrow it down? How did you decide which family gets centered? I mean, we go from the Bonapartes, the Krapps, Uhurus, Kenya, Zulus. I mean, who was there like a criteria that you used to decide who will get featured, who won't?
That's such a good question. I mean, there are probably over 100 families in the book. They're not all kings and queens. Some of them are novelists. Many of them are historians. We've already mentioned one who paid a high price for writing his history. And other ones, there are hereditary executioners. We have everything. Tom Paine, the American revolutionary thinker, said, a hereditary monarch is as absurd as a hereditary postman. But but we know many hereditary postmen. And many of the professions that we know well in our secular, rather rational societies, lawyers, doctors, politicians, many of them are in effect hereditary, informally. But what I was looking for was either families that were absolutely essential. I use families and individuals to do what I call tether or harness greater movements of history, whether they're technologies or ideologies or religions. And so some families are essential. And I mentioned I began planning this book with the three key mega families, which are the family of Genghis Khan and Tamerlane and the Mughals who ruled India, that the Charlemagne family that we follow all the way through the Habsburgs to 1918, and then lastly the Prophet Muhammad's family, one of the greatest dynasties. The family still ruled the Kingdom of Jordan, but at various times they ruled vast Arab empires that stretched from the borders of Morocco all the way to Iran. And so once I worked out what those three families would be, I realized the book would work. And from then on, I could choose which families I liked. And basically, the lovely thing about writing one of these books, and the great thing about writing books, as you know yourself, is that there's no intermediaries. We literally are responsible for every word in our books. There are many, many artistic forms, movies and TV and acting and many others, where you're constantly in a huge team. But ours is a solitary pastime, a solitary profession. And so I could decide, all these books that I write are really written for me. And I write what I want to read, what I would enjoy reading. And so the families that I've chosen, some are essential and some just fascinated me so much that I wanted to put them in. But there are various criteria. One is, I wanted this, I guess I'm a person of my time. I wanted this to be the most diverse history that I could possibly write. I didn't want it just to be European and North American, like many of the world histories before it. On the other hand, I didn't want to displace those and pretend that Europe didn't matter and was less important than it really was. I wanted to have Africa, I wanted to have Asia, China, India, Africa, South America are all hugely featured. One of the things I wanted to do was to treat African or Asian families, whether it's the Dahomey dynasty or the Ming dynasty of China, I wanted to treat them exactly like I would treat the Romanovs or the Habsburgs or the Windsors. And the other part of it, which has been mentioned already earlier by Batya, was women. I wanted to have women, I wanted to have children in it. But I also didn't want these families only to be the families that had dominated great powers. So of course the Kennedys are in there and the Roosevelts and other families that we know, the Ming and the Mughals of India and China. But I also wanted it to have smaller countries. I didn't just want a victor's history. So this has Haiti and Cambodia and Hawaii and Albania in it as well. So the criteria that I was using are sort of many. Some I just wanted them in because they're totally outrageous. Mm-hmm. And some I just wanted them in because they're essential.